Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at All Points TV and also WFOV, and that's the great radio station 92.1. And we're glad to have listeners from both of these venues. Hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour. Well, today was a very big day for our president. And I do say our president. I think we have a person who's trying to be the president of all the people. I mean, government of the people, by the people, for government of the people, by the people, for the people. And I think we have that president in Donald John Trump.
Did you see CNN's comment what he about his Twitters? Me and my friend who was here was reading this stuff about this Twitter, and CNN reported what he said about something, about his meeting with Putin, and at the end of it said surreal. So I mean, it's just basically labeling. I never seen the press already denounce or whatever. I mean, when they say, "No, it's a failure. This is a failure," I've never seen them do that to any other president.
Are we now getting a sense of the fourth estate now, John? Is this the fourth estate?
Well, see, I think but I'm going to make a point here. You might not like it, but then again, him always calling CNN fake news is getting old. Okay, he has got to deal with, if he wants to be the president of all people, you have to be kind of a suck up, okay, to be a good politician, okay? Because you got to forget that you really don't like these people. You got to pretend like you like them. Because let's face it, nobody, I like what Ross Perot said. He goes, I like to say I love you all, but no, I don't really love you all. I just want you all working so you can pay into taxes. Okay, that's the way, at least that honesty is really refreshing. But I mean, he should back off and call on this fake news stuff. He's got to back off.
I think that, no, I don't agree with you on that. We do disagree on that point. I think that Donald Trump is doing the right thing to confront the deep state, and we now see that part of the deep state is the media, led by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and look at all those other so-called, they call it the mainstream media, but you got to confront these people. You probably didn't agree with him last week when he did not take the question from John Acosta from CNN. Did you see that?
I saw that, but what I think he's got to do is, I would say it'd be more constructive. He goes, why don't we look at what you're saying and how you report stuff? Why do you? I would address that directly right to them. I would turn the question and answer period. It's like it's a two-way street. He's supposed to answer questions. He can also ask questions. Why do you feel the need to always label or always put things? You sum it up like everything I'm doing is like totally wrong. Why can't you? And another thing is, should everybody accept your labels? And why don't you flesh it out with reasons why I might be wrong? Okay, why don't you do that? That's how I would take it. I would actually turn it on them. I'd actually have more of a dialogue between them. And I can see him calling out people. Initially, I can understand that. But at this point, he's 2.5 years into the game, right? A little bit over 2 years into the game. He's got to realize these people they're basically people are looking at him and saying, "Oh yeah, see what CNN says about him. He's trashing all those. They're trashing all those people, and all those people voted for Trump." And basically, the people look to the press for the validation of their choices. It's like critics. The critics making a comment about music or art, and then people reading that think they're just the average person. They're not experts or anything. They're looking for validation from what they were assuming to be experts. So, I mean, Trump's got to realize that. These people, the general population looks at his journalists as some kind of godlings. Okay, for some reason, I don't know why. I mean, journalism basically, so I could see someone up would have basically have morals and ethics, actually try to cover the facts and do the inverted, try to keep everything important up top and less important things down the bottom. The inverted pyramid when you're writing. You do that also in the same form when you're doing a interview and stuff. That's what I would suggest doing. But they don't do that. It's like the whole standards of objectivity just simply don't exist anymore for journalism.
It doesn't. Sean Hannity says almost on a regular basis on his program, comes on at 9 o'clock on Fox, and he says journalism is dead in America. And I don't see how the press can stand up there with the bias, this bias that we're seeing right now, which I think this bias has been there. The liberal press has been a biased media for a long time, but I don't think it's ever been more extreme than it is right now in the Donald Trump. They absolutely hate this man. And part of it is because their media projections in 2016, they had this guy getting slaughtered. And we weren't supposed to believe our lying eyes, so they were telling us that Donald Trump had no chance and Hillary Clinton's going to win by a landslide. And then, of course, election day, November the 8th came up, and then we saw that we were being propagandized by the media. And those of us that have been watching the media over a period of time, going back, let's say, to at least Watergate, where the media toppled the Nixon administration, that was a coup d'etat that we had in the United States in 1974. On August the 9th, when Richard Nixon resigned, the Nixon administration was toppled by the media. And they threw him out by keeping the Watergate matter before the public. And then the public then thought this was something unusual going on in Washington, when Washington is one of the most corrupt cesspools on the planet. We can talk, we can make up these narratives all we want to, but those narratives are not true about the American government is not third world, or they are somehow different from other governments around the world that are corrupt. You can read the book by Charles Adams that I brought to the studio here called Those Dirty Rotten Taxes, and go and read this book. He makes it very explicit. This government has more spies, particularly tax spies, than any government on the planet. There are people trying to run out of this country to avoid taxes. And when they go to other parts of the world, they have tax agents inside the embassies of the United States all over the world. So when you're trying to run to avoid taxes and trying to get out of here to do it, you're going to find out that they got spies in every one of the American embassies. And so this idea we have all this freedom, we can make these claims now, but when it comes down to looking at the hard facts, the liberties in this country are being eroded, and we're not as free as we think we are.
Well, we haven't been. I mean, that's the thing, is it's just getting more and more apparent. Like you're alluding to about basically I asked the FBI's got to, not the FBI, the IRS has got to sign off on your travel plans, if you want to, because they think you're trying to skirt around them not paying them. I mean, I don't see how people think we are a free people when we have to pay the master money before we can go travel. How is that any different than slavery? How is it any different?
John, the country lost its freedom in 1913 when they introduced the income tax, which had been prohibited by the wisdom of the framers. We weren't allowed to impose direct taxes on the citizens of this country. Or if you did, in fact, let me read Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Let me read that to you. Let's see what it says here. Okay, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers. And it goes on and talk about how if you're going to do a direct tax, it must be apportioned among the several states, which is not that different from what is required in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Listen to this part here in the Constitution. I mean, the framers knew what they were doing. It says, to lay and collect taxes, the heading of it is the Congress shall have power. And then in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, it says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But listen to this part here. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. You see the thinking of the framers. They recognize the danger of a direct tax. And if the taxes were not uniform and if they were not proportional, then those taxes were unconstitutional. You can see why they had to have an amendment in the Constitution to allow for a tax that we have right now, the income tax, which is neither uniform nor is a portion among the 50 states. What they did was to take out of the Constitution the framers' idea, which is Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, took it out of the Constitution. And then after abrogating that part of the Constitution and making it persona non grata, so to speak, then they put in the income tax, which was never intended by the framers. And at that point, the people of this country lost their freedom. The income tax is a death knell for liberty in the country. And it's amazing to me that they could push this nonsense that it's possible to cut taxes without cutting spending. You know, there's certain laws. You know, for example, there's a law that says that two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. You can't change that law. Or you can say that you can't change the law that the shortest distance between 2 points of a straight line. Just as those two things are true, you cannot cut taxes and not cut spending at the same time. Otherwise, you're not cutting taxes. Somebody tell me, how do you cut taxes without at the same time cutting spending? You can't do it.
And they act like everything out there is a sacred cow that cannot be looked at to examine to see if it's still essential. I mean, we have things we are paying for that were put in place for a purpose at one time, and it should have been readdressed after the need had passed and then removed them. But we're still paying tax. We're paying taxes on our cell phones, on
everything.
On everything. I mean, your service. You're paying for. Let's face it. Most people have to have a phone for emergencies, for be able to contact for jobs. Okay, and that may be, that was the impetus of basically behind, I guess, Obama's, administration getting phones to people. But now turning around taxing people, it's basically everything is done punitively. That's what taxation now is done, and that's what you got to address. Why would a government take it on themselves and say, you don't deserve that? Well, Obama said that directly to people who were some business creators. You didn't build that, somebody else did. That was like, I mean, what did he ever do? Except for run a nonprofit into non-existence. I mean, other than that, I mean, he didn't build that entirely on his own, I don't think. So I don't understand why he was so angry and had this like arrogance against people who were small business owners or even corporation leaders. Why do you have such an animus against them? I don't understand.
It's an attack upon the natural influences of society, the ones that are the motors of society. Those are the producers. And to say they did not build, as Obama was saying, you didn't build that. Somebody supplied the roads. Somebody built the highways that you carried your produce over those roads. And so he was saying that the people that are producing are not the ones producing. He wanted people to believe government is in fact doing it.
Do you see where Domino's is actually willing to repair roads if they're on a route for their pizza delivery and might cause damage to the pizza? They're actually willing to actually undertake that underwrite it themselves. Okay, government. Let's face it, government doesn't create anything. Obama, when he was saying that they built the roads, the money was taken through taxes. But people would have fewer issue with taxes being taken if there's a demonstrable use of that money for the intended purpose. But there isn't. I mean, look at the roads here, and we got some of the highest fuel taxes in the country. Okay, where's that money going to?
Yeah, politicians want us to think that everything emanates from government. We were saying last week that this idea that you have a Bill of Rights, they say that's in the Constitution of the United States, because the idea they're putting across is that our rights come from government. In fact, when I said that last week, some of the persons that watched this program, we were out in a couple of places in the community, and there were some people that were saying that there is a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. I said, well, I want you to show it to me then. If it's in the Constitution, if you have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, then you need to show me where it is located. Because it's certainly not in the first 10 amendments. That's not a Bill of Rights in the first 10 amendments. These are further prohibitions against the federal government doing what it's doing right now. They were trying to restrain the federal government from going out of control. And they did everything they could do to stop that from happening, but yet it still happened because governments are run by politicians. As long as politicians are running government, you're going to have the continuing engorgement of more and more power, accumulating more and more authority, taking more and more liberty, and going more and more out of control. And the framers are trying to stop that. And they did part of it by trying to restrain the purse of the federal government. And up until 1913, with the 16th Amendment, you could not, in fact, impose an income tax constitutionally upon the people of this country. Although it had been done in the past under, for example, Abraham Lincoln imposed income tax, which was tolerated because of the war. But after the war came to a close, the American people would not have tolerated an income tax, and so that tax had to go away. But in 1913, I don't know. You talking about a Generation X, the stupid generation. The stupid generation. Here you had Congress proposing an amendment to the Constitution, and it took 3/4 of the states to ratify the proposed income tax. And there you were, there you had the people, legislative bodies in each of the states, 3/4 of the states, ratifying an income tax where they imposed a tax upon themselves by the federal government, never intended by the framers. So when you start talking about Generation X, let's talk about the stupid generation. And also let's talk about this generation, where, let me read page 170 of this book called Those Dirty Rotten Taxes. I'll be very embarrassed if it's not there, but you can believe it's on that page. Let me read this to you. This is page 170 of the book called Those Dirty Rotten Taxes. Now, I said earlier, right, that it's impossible to lower taxes and not cut spending. It's impossible to do that. Just like two objects can't occupy the same space at the same time, which is a physical law. You can't put two objects in the same space at the same time. You cannot cut taxes and then not cut spending. It's impossible for that to happen. So you say, okay, we got more money in our check that than we had before they call it tax reform. Give me a break. Tax reform would be you put the income tax into place in 1913. Reform would be to take it out of here and reform the tax code to go back to what the framers had. There's no reforming of the tax system in this country. But how do you, in fact, lower taxes and don't cut spending? Somebody explain that to me. It's impossible. So if you cannot do it, then what happened to the taxes? The taxes were transferred onto the children. Let me read something. Let me read this to you. Page 170 of this book. Now, I have a beef with the generation that preceded my generation, because there were some generations after that too before I was born, but I'm talking about going back to the generation of 1913. I'm mad at that generation. Talk about Generation X. That's generation of the stupids. Here's what it says on page 170. Let me read this. Our descendants those that are coming after us, our descendants, will inherit a debt almost beyond human capacity to conceive. So large that if we paid it off at the rate of the daily cost of the O.J. Simpson trial, you see, this book was written in 1995, estimated at $55,000 a day. The O.J. Simpson trial cost taxpayers $55,000 a day. If you paid off the national debt, which at that time stood at $4 trillion, now it stands at $20 trillion. If you paid it off at $55,000 a day, it will take over 250,000 years to discharge that debt. And that's just, and we're just talking about the $4 trillion of debt at that time is now 5 times that. It will take 250,000 years to pay off a $4 trillion debt at $55,000 a day. Now with 20 trillion of debt, multiply that by a factor of 5. You won't. So where did the debt go? They said they had a tax break. They gave everybody a tax break. Did they really give a tax break? No, they gave you your children's money. And you know how you love the kids, right? Oh, we love the kids, separating the children from their family. Look at the border. And look what they're doing. Don't look at what they've done to my song. Look what they're doing to the country. And these politicians want us to believe that our rights come from government. You know, when people see me in these stores and come across the aisle, basically they want to get in my face and want to challenge the notion that our rights don't come from the government. Let me make it even more clear than that. Let me be more upfront with that. Because let's get to the real nitty-gritty of that. If Thomas Paine is right in saying that governments are a necessary evil at best, and the reason why he said that is because he said the government is managed by politicians, then to say then that our rights come from the government is to say that we get our rights from politicians. How many of you believe that? We get that they're actually telling us, this is how bold they are. Politicians are actually telling us that our rights come from them. If you say it comes from government, who runs government? Politicians run government. Does anybody in their right mind believe that our rights come from politicians? And what if you get a bad one? Let's see, 164.
I'm surprised that you actually got to look it up because usually you got the book, you got the paraphrase, you know, the.
Yeah, I want them to see me, see me on the page in the book, because if I don't do that, they'll think you're making this stuff up because nobody is saying these things. We have been brainwashed in this country.
Well, that's, you know, you ask most people where, I mean, they're used to teaching that class. They actually seen this, somebody put it on Facebook, that they got a kid's assignment home from school. And it actually says in it, our rights come from granted by the government. It says it right there in this kid's homework, not homework, but a handout the teacher gave them. This is how they're indoctrinating our kids. And I mean, it's scary. It's scary.
Listen to this right here on page 164. We're talking about all this liberty you're supposed to have from these politicians to get our rights from government. And they're so benevolent. And they have given us our rights out of the goodness of their out of the goodness of their heart. You know what? You cannot be normal and believe that. In fact, what is happening, quite frankly, is what La Raza writes about. The psychological causes of political madness. That's madness. This country has been driven out of its mind. Almost everything that's been taught in school is the glorification of this nation's rulers. And we are coming up on a break here in a minute or so, and we'll welcome those at WFOV back with us in about 4 minutes. We're glad to have you with us, and we're not going to stray very far from where we are when you take your break, and we will see you after your break after 4 minutes of pause. Glad to have all of you with us. Those of us who will stay at allpointstv.com, we'll continue what we're doing here. But we have been sold a lot of bads. You know how I say a bill of goods? This is a bill of bads. This idea that we are the freest country in the world. There are probably 21 countries in the world right now that are more free than the United States. And you go look this up in terms of, look at Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong.
You read Eat the Rich with P.J. O'Rourke, didn't you?
I read that book.
Yeah, it's finance, and this was written by, I think, 1995, 96, maybe.
Yeah.
No, I think it was 2000 it came out.
Okay.
99, 2000.
Yeah, Peter O'Rourke's book.
But it was really good. P.J. O'Rourke, excellent writer, and people out there should, if you go to the library, get that book. It's
yeah,
really
and you know, John, do you know why the politicians eat the rich? Why when they tax, when they start taxing, they always go to sell the tax. At the beginning point, they are going to tax the rich, and then everybody, you're going to tax it 2%. Why do you think they do that, John? Why do you think that they put, when they initiate new taxes to sell it to the country, before they enlarge upon it, they put the tax upon 2% of the population, the rich?
Because it's basically feeling they use the resentment of people who have what they consider little. They're saying, well, we're going to only tax the people who have a lot. So people have a lot. So they don't see the philosophical argument, or they don't see the reasoning that if you allow this to happen, it's going to turn around and it's not going to. They're not going to be satisfied with the 2% being taxed. Ultimately, they're going to have to go to you as well. But they don't see that. It's just out of resentment. Never underestimate the power.
We
of
have to
resentment.
watch that very carefully. That's the biggest part of it, but there's another part and component of it as well, and that is that the reason why you put the taxes upon the minority part of the population, 2%, is because they don't have the numbers to fight back. It's part of what John said also in terms of the envy. They envy the rich and so on. That's part of it. The other part of it is that by the majority imposing a larger burden upon a minority group. See, we think about minorities just in terms of race and things of that sort. That's what they sell. But they sell the minority is also those who make up the smallest of the classes. That's the people who are the great producers of the country, who by their own ability to produce and make a product that the people demand and are willing to pay for, they're able to then grow rich because of their productive capacity. Government goes and tax that production. And the reason why they're able to get away with it is because the 2%, the 5%, the 10% don't have the numbers to fight back. This is one of the reasons why James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were so askance and so fearful of majorities. They call it the tyranny of majorities.
Actually, kind of a Lonnie Guinier. She was one of the people that I think Bill Clinton was looking at to point to the Supreme Court one time. Remember Lonnie Guinier?
Yeah,
she actually wrote a book called The Tyranny of the Majorities.
Bill Clinton was going to appoint her.
That's what I said. Bill Clinton was going to appoint her. Yeah. And so I mean, I would pray. I don't know her personally. I don't know her full political thing. But being along with the Clintons, I don't think they are right wing fanatics. She recognized the problem with her suggestion, and the way she turned around was different. But she actually wrote a book, The Tyranny of the Majorities. The majority.
Oh, yes, yeah. I have that book, John. Yeah, the majority is tyrannical, and that's why the framers were trying to come up with a scheme, explained in let's see, Federalist Paper 9 written by Hamilton, and 10 written by James Madison. In fact, James Madison wrote his first of the 29 Federalist Papers that he wrote. 10 was the first one that James Madison wrote. And both of those, 9 and 10, 9 by Hamilton, 10 by James Madison, were dealing with the problem of factions. And they had to come up with a way of tying majorities down, because majorities are a faction as well. In fact, the majority faction is the most dangerous of the factions, because they can impose their will because they have the numbers upon the smaller group. And the framers had to figure out how to, in fact, do that. And it's a brilliant scheme they came up with.
By the way, welcome back to WFOV listeners, okay?
Okay, glad you're back from WFOV. And we are still talking about these dirty, Charles Adams' book, those dirty, rotten taxes. And there's never going to be any reform of taxes until they give us our money back. That's just the way it is. And this idea that you can cut taxes, they don't cut taxes in this country. They don't give you back any money. What they do is they transfer the money into the tax coffers of the future, called the national debt. And if you are not standing up against that, then you don't love the kids, because all that tax burden goes upon the generation yet to be born. Just like we're paying for the sins of our forefathers in terms of those persons that put into place this income tax that's allowed this government to get out of control, and the states cannot any longer have anything to say about what the federal government does. It never intended. How 3/4 of the states ratified that amendment and allowed for the federal government to in essence, take the liberty from the states. Really what happened with the 16th Amendment was that they actually canceled out the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, which was all rights that are not given to the federal government, all claims, all power that is not enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, in those 18 clauses, all of those powers not expressly given, delegated, enumerated, itemized, listed. They actually went down and listed the powers that were being given to the federal government from the sovereignty of the people. The people are, through their state representatives, their state mandated representatives, they are bequeathing to the federal government certain powers to the federal government. I don't know how we get this idea the federal government is giving us our rights. We're giving powers to the federal government. Who is that speaking, you think, when they say Congress shall? When they say this right here in these amendments. Let me read Amendment 1. And you tell me, who's speaking here? Congress shall make no law. Now, you think that's Congress speaking? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Who is that talking? That's not the federal government talking, that the Congress is going to limit its own powers. That voice you're hearing there, that voice is the voice of the states speaking, that's speaking through as a result of the people who are infusing this power from their own sovereignty into the sovereignty of the states, and through the states bequeathing this power to the federal government. In other words, the federal government gets its powers from the state. The states get its power from the people. So the people are saying the government can do this, this and this. Now, how do we get around to this nonsense, reversing it, that the government is giving us our the government is giving us our rights? Yeah, it's amazing that they can get away with this stuff. I mean, I see why they got me off of Facebook. I see more clearly now, and really, I think, and I was thinking about this last night. I'm off there also because I was writing about the taxation policies of the country. I was writing about how we have been sold the idea. For example, we think that these people are doing us a favor by giving us some of our money back. These people steal our money, and then they are so good to us, right, that they will, in fact, give us a tax break. They're doing it. So we are to be thankful that some of our money that they took from us by the forces of the state, we are supposed to be beholden to them because some of our money was given back to us. And they didn't have to use all the money. They just simply transferred it. They use all the money we send there. And then to show you how criminal they are, they then go beyond that because they found another way to, in fact, increase their power, which is to increase the appropriation by borrowing the money from the future, which is where they place these taxes. There was no tax cut recently given by the Trump administration. The government doesn't give you any money back. What the government does, it places the tax cut into the future. It's not even a tax cut. It's a transference of the tax, and they put it into the future, and they tax the children. You know, the children that you love so much. It's the kids. We got to make sure we take care of the kids. You got page 170 again. You got a $20 trillion debt. When it stood in 1995 at $4 trillion, if we paid it off at the rate of the daily cost of O.J. Simpson's trial at that time, $55,000 a day, it would take over 250,000 years to pay that debt off. It would take 100,000 years just to pay the current the current 1995 budget, which is $1.2 trillion a year.
But you know what's really more galling if you actually consider who all this money is being paid back to with interest. Okay, why don't you go into that a little bit? I mean, because a lot of people don't know that. Who are we paying back? And they'll say the taxes are collected and all that, and we're going to be paid back. A lot of people are unaware of who we pay.
Yeah, you know, John, it's really interesting how they maneuver. Not so much behind closed doors as they're maneuvering right in front of our face. We don't even know what we're looking at. If we understand how paper currency is, how money, what they call money, is not money. You can't see. That's another question. Can you create money? Can money be created? If so, how? How do you create money? Is there anybody out there who thinks that you can print money? Raise your hand. Money cannot be printed. You can't print money. So what are you printing? You're printing debt. Paper currency is born into the quote-unquote money stream. It can only be put into the money stream as debt. So let's say then, I'm going to put a tablet here on one side, and we're going to say that represents the debt. Now, on top of the debt, if you do it at the Federal Reserve, the debt has a 6% markup. So it's the currency that's created, which is the paper in your pocket, what's in your wallet. That's what's in your wallet, along with the credit card. Then on top of that currency that's in your wallet, there's a 6% markup in terms of the interest It was created by the Federal Reserve. And where is that interest? Let me tell you where it is. It doesn't exist. You see, the only thing that's borrowed into existence is the principal. The interest is not borrowed into existence, and it does not exist. So that you never have a money supply that matches the debt, because the interest is never created. That's just one part of it. Now let's see what happens here. When they say they're going to reduce the debt, that's what politicians say now. We're going to reduce the debt. We're going to eliminate the debt, okay? If you eliminate the debt and you put the equivalent amount of currency over here, this is debt plus the interest, but let's say the debt. If you start to eliminate the debt, because the currency is a debt, listen carefully, because the currency is a debt, when the debt goes down, the currency goes out of existence. You know why? Because the debt is the flip side of the currency. It's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the money supply. Your currency is a debt. And they want people to believe they're borrowing debt, they're borrowing this money from China. You think China is loaning the United States money? From what source? You know what our debt is? Our debt is in your pocket. You're walking around with the debt. And when you take your credit card and spend your credit card, what happens there is, since that debt does not exist until you spend at the store, that debt, when it's born, it also is born in with an interest payment. Because I know how credit operates, so I never pay them anything for the use of the debt. I pay the principal back. I never pay the interest. I pay it within 25 days.
You see, they call you in the credit card industry, they call you a deadbeat. They can't get money off of you.
I'm the person that use what I do with the debt, since I understand it is debt, is that when I go and spend on my credit card, I make it a point to use my credit card to extend my monetary, might, my power, just say my money supply. If you want to call currency money. Currency is not money, currency is debt. But let's say you want to use debt to pay off your bills. What I do is I take the 25-day grace period, use the money, the quote-unquote money, and use that during the 25-day grace period. At the end of the 25-day grace period, I pay all of it off at that point. I write them a check and pay that off. And I use that other debt without paying anything on top of it. Because I know that the interest will accrue to the debt, because you can't have debt created without there being an interest on it. All debt has an interest on it. As long as it sits there and it's sitting there drawing interest, the longer it sits there, you're getting more and more in debt, because money, the quote-unquote money, currency, that sits there, when it's sitting there, it is actually costing you just because it exists. The longer it exists, the more costly it is. And that's a game that got these student loans on. Those students coming out of school, they don't even have a job to pay those debts off. And they're sitting there coming out of school with $100,000 of debt. And then if you can't pay it off, before you know it, it's $175,000, $200,000. Because it's sitting there without having the marketable skills to get a job commensurate with the debt, and also the cost of living. You can't pay it off. So they are in debt the rest of their lives. And maybe the government will do what it can do, because it's all fake. So the government comes in on the white horse again and says, well, we're going to do debt forgiveness. So all of a sudden the politicians again are doing us a service, right? Because they're so benevolent. The currency doesn't even exist. All this is false. The whole premise is false. You can't print money. And in Article 1, Section 8, let me read this to you. In Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power. Now listen very carefully. In Article 1, Section 8, listen to Clause 5. To coin, C-O-I-N, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Now, I don't know if you noticed it or not, but all of a sudden, on the coin money, you turn that money to the side, and you start seeing some brown coming through the coin, right? Why was that? Why did that happen? Because when they started devaluing the currency and devaluing the coins, they started putting copper in there with a silver coating. So the silver, go look at some of those old silver coins. They were silver all the way through. But as they devalued the money supply, they started putting, to the level of the devaluation, they started putting copper in it and putting silver over the coating of the coin. Because that's how they devalue the money supply. And by devaluing the money supply, they actually create a currency and a coinage that doesn't buy as much. And that's how they operate. It's all, in other words, everything we're doing right now in the country, everything that the government's doing is basically running a scam on the American people. It's all a scam. Anybody that has any confidence in these politicians, every last one of whom, by the very nature of their business, is a parasite. You can't be a politician and not be a parasite. I mean, I like them as individuals. I do not like them as politicians. And as politicians, they're all the same. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about Republicans, all this noise they make about Republicans and Democrats. There's no difference between a Democrat and a Republican. They're all parasites. And they're all up there finessing the American people, acting like we have representation there. They're doing it even now with these hearings. I can tell you right now that they had Peter Strzok up there last week. And Peter Strzok was up there lying before the Congress, saying that he could be making those statements against Donald Trump, at the same time conduct an investigation, and he would in fact be able to be non-biased in investigating Donald Trump, who's calling a madman an idiot, and yet he can do an investigation and throw all that bias out as he does his job. Said that before the Congress last week, and lied before Congress as they've been doing. Call me lie before Congress, I'll tell you the litmus test. The litmus test is, ain't nobody going to jail. They can, all that noise they're making, all those scams they're running, nobody's going to jail. Hillary Clinton destroyed 33,000 emails after they've been subpoenaed. And who are they investigating? They're investigating the outsider. They're not going to investigate the criminals, because as Dinesh D'Souza said, they are the system, and they're not going to investigate themselves. They're going to give the appearance of investigating. They're investigating the government. The government is going to hold itself accountable. If anybody believes that, the government is going to hold itself accountable to the American people after having destroyed the Constitution, which was to maintain control of the government. They have destroyed this document, and they're going to now, after having destroyed it, they're going to hold themselves accountable under the Constitution. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to jail in this case here. This collusion with Russia, this selling of the uranium, all the things they said that Donald Trump was doing, which none of that occurred, all this cover-up that they're doing, they're not going to do one thing on the left to investigate this. None of them are going to be brought to. Brennan not going to jail. Comey, Roberts of the DI. What's the other? Clapper. They're walking around here free because they are part of what we call the deep state. But the deep state is what? The deep state is all of them. It took us a long time to figure out what we meant by the deep state. The deep state is the American government. It's a hidden hand. The public persona of the government on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is the hidden hand of government. The Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One face in public, another face behind the public's back. The same instrument. And they're running a scam because they do not intend to have their power restricted. The American people are going to have to take some ownership here of their government. And Donald Trump is right in saying we have to take the government back because we lost control of the government. And we lost control of the government in 1913. This government's been out of control. Go and count the years up from 1913 to 2018. 15 years? Let's see, 105 years. 105 years later. We lost control of the government of the United States in 1913 when we gave the government the power, the tyrannical power, to tax the American people directly, which was never intended by the framers. The framers had it right. And what we did was come behind the framers and abrogate the system they put in place because they knew the danger of government. They knew it was a necessary evil. And we've allowed ourselves to be deluded into believing that you can put money in the hands of these criminals and they will use it in behalf of the people, but not in behalf of the elite that run this country. And the elite run this country, and they run it against the American people's best interests. And if that's not true, why are both parties ganging up on Donald Trump? Everything Donald Trump does. They had John McCain out there yesterday. Right? Was anybody, by the way, was anybody surprised that Rosenstein, anybody surprised that Rosenstein came out 2 days before the Helsinki conference was held with Putin? Is anybody surprised that 2 days before that meeting was to take place, Friday of last week, Rosenstein comes out and tells the American people something that we already knew. We knew that they had an indictment of 12 Russians that they say were trying to influence the election of the United States in 2016. We knew that. That was already well known as of March of last year. So why did Rosenstein come out with it as Donald Trump is getting ready to meet with Putin? And then they were saying that he shouldn't meet with Putin to make it look like the traitor is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is trying to correct the problem. The traitors are those gangsters that Michelle Malkin's writing about. Gangster government. Or what Della Renza is writing about. Della Renza's book, Throw Them All Out. Or the other book he put out called The Architects of Ruin. These people have run outside of the limits of the Constitution. As long as they're outside the restraints of the Constitution, they're gangsters. This Constitution right here was to limit the power of the federal government. The whole document was intended for that purpose. And what they did was it got more and more powerful, and eventually what they did was take this document and throw it out the window. Destroy this document. And now there are no restraints. The states can't restrain the power of the federal government, and we don't have any authority to restrain the federal government. Cannot be done. And until we get back to the basics and return back to the framers, we cannot get this job done. Okay, we got to get out of here. I know that we went a little astray here with the discussion, but we want you to always follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream...
Well, you got about a minute and a half left, so, I mean, you don't have to go right real quick. I haven't given you the signal yet, but you're guessing about right. So, yeah, it's like, I think you did a great job. Another thing is, too, I think that people should go out and get a copy of the Constitution somewhere. I mean, they probably can get a PDF file loaded on from the internet, and also read through that. I mean, because... But a lot of people have opposition. They think some people's opposition to the Constitution, it was a racist document created by racist people, and it's like, you know, it's basically, it's words it doesn't really say. It doesn't favor, the wording of it don't favor any particular group. And they say maybe, you know, some Marxists will say it, you know, it was just a bunch of upper crust white guys who didn't want to pay taxes, and that's the reason why they broke away from England. But
yeah, we have got to return to the framers. There's no other hope for this country if we don't return to the ideals of the founders. They had the formula right, and they wanted to give us a limited government, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, that spoke through us in terms of the laws they made. We were supposed to be the ones that were commanding the country. The voice of the government was to be the voice of the people, and they've taken that from us. And they did, and they actually overthrew this document, quite frankly, with the passage of the 16th Amendment. At that point, we lost control. And then, also the same year, in 1913, they passed the 17th Amendment, which was the one that gave the election of the senators, popular election of the senators, no longer were elected by the state legislatures. And we have the popular election of senators, then that's another nail in the coffin of the Constitution. Never intended by the framers. Okay, we got to get out of here. I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.